Hey everybody, this is Chris McCabe of e-commerce. Chris, we're back with Ask an Amazon Agency or Service Provider. I'm here with Jim Mann of Threecolts. Jim, how are you?
I'm good, Chris. Thanks for having me on the call.
Of course. I wanted to have you on this new series we're doing because I know a lot of Amazon sellers are juggling lots of challenges and financial pressures and maybe looking to cut costs. And I've spoken with a lot of experts like you in terms of the right ways to do it, the right places to look, the wrong places to look, the wrong ways to do it. Where do you come out on where sellers should start when they assess what they need to do first?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really common, people sort of they start from the top, you look at your cost of goods, and whilst you can find savings there, I think for FBA sellers, looking at your product packaging and trying to optimize product design for size tiers actually can give you a better saving than fighting over 1 or 2% COGS with your Chinese supplier, for example.
Right.
And also, closely linked to that, if rather than negotiating them down on price, you can negotiate payment terms, that actually gives you a lot more cash flow in your business. And the shorter the cash flow cycle, the more money you actually make. So sometimes fighting with the factory is not the best place to start. Focus with them on payment terms, but then look at the evolving size tiers and see if you can talk to them about shifting packaging or changing the product. An extreme example is when I was at Thrasio, we bought a brand that was a mop, and we designed a telescopic handle for it, and we saved $5 a unit on size, which was on a $50 product. That was transformational for the contribution margin on that specific SKU. So I think looking at your SKU portfolio and trying to see whether a unit savings on size tiers as a potential is talked about, but not often done.
What do you think most sellers start with? Just like, oh, we have to increase prices, we have to reduce prices. Do you think people just start with price as a knee-jerk reaction instead of taking like a holistic view of everything they're paying money for?
Yeah, I think price is another one that people are scared to touch. So I events, and I've asked people in the room who's changed their pricing in the last 3 months, and people sheepishly put their hands up, but most people are scared to touch price. So this is a huge one to mitigate against margin compression, and it's the least done and quickest impact is price testing. And for many products, there's a surprising correlation between an increase in price and increased sales velocity, which is the opposite of what most brands think will happen. So my advice is do it, take the emotion out of it, let the data do the talking, and let a software test. And the right softwares will look at not just velocity, but they'll look at conversion and the other key metrics on Amazon to fit ranking. So, Threecolts has a repricing tool, and there are many other out there as well. That make sure you use a tool rather than try and do that yourself.
Right. Well, people are also trying to figure out what to do with ad costs, right? I mean, maybe some people reduce ACoS, maybe others aren't. Do you think the right parameters are being used to make those decisions, or is it like kind of panic parameters?
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing with everyone's suffering with ad costs at the moment. So I think it's easy to go, right, we're going to bring our ACoS thresholds down, and all of these things that they work sort of symbiotically with other things. And one of the biggest contributors to ad cost is actually conversion. And I think sometimes it's easy to focus on your ad budget and ACoS before, or focusing as much on click-through rates on your main image on Amazon, which is, if people don't click on that main image, they're not even going to look at the listing and the listing conversion itself. So get your house in order on click-through rate for main image, conversion rate on page, and then look at advertising. And then day parting is huge in terms of efficient ad spend. So if you're not day parting, make sure that you look at that as a way of optimizing ad spend, and spend money when people are buying. Don't waste clicks at the end of the evening when people are bored and just browsing with no intent to buy, for example.
So people aren't day parting enough. They're just using a generic approach without...
Most agencies and a lot of the automation tools, day parting is part of their strategy. But for sellers not using agencies, I'm not sure it's that common. And it's probably one of the biggest ways to make ad spend deliver better returns.
And we also talked a little bit about inventory management. I know you have some tips and tricks and some ideas along those lines. Well, in terms of, I assume you're speaking with people who might be making some mistakes that can be corrected. I don't know if they can be corrected quickly or not.
Inventory management is something I don't think anyone is genuinely could say they've solved 100%. I think, with Amazon's overstock, understock fees, AWD provided a done for you mitigation against that. So you can ship into AWD and they drip feed according to velocity.
Mm-hmm.
It's imperfect, but if you're not good at inventory management, it's a good solution. And then there are some softwares out there, but I think inventory management is the least solved problem, big problem for any brand right now.
Yeah. I'm starting to get a lot of people approaching us almost like they're approaching it like a suspension or an appeal process where Amazon's just completely botching their inventory and they want help because they've tried to get Amazon to fix what units go where or the wrong units being sent out. And I've gotten the impression that things have gotten more chaotic inside the fulfillment centers. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I'm seeing a small population, but
no. So this is interesting. So we have a reimbursement business, and so we see which warehouses lose more inventory, and we're going to start sharing this soon because this is all part of cost structures. Because if you're sending stuff into a warehouse that makes sense for your shipping costs, but they lose half your inventory or they take 2 weeks to receive, this is the big thing. If you have a container sat outside for 2 weeks, that kills people. So we're just putting together now that data that we will be able to share with sellers in our tools that allows them to make sure that they ship to the warehouses that receive quickest, lose the least, and therefore end up making the most sales.
Yeah, and I was also wondering if people, now that there's fees associated with not selling quickly enough through your inventory, right? You get punished for selling slower. Do you think that's making people panic into error and do desperation moves just because they're facing so many other financial challenges that they're trying to save money on the inventory, on the sell-through side?
I just think it's very hard because any decision you make today is kind of lagging of what's actually happened. So, you try not to have too much inventory ordered from the supply chain. If you're ordered from Asia, that's quite a long decision from decision delivery, 6 to 12 weeks if you're lucky. And so if you suddenly have a slowdown in demand for whatever reason or an acceleration, you can't just pull a lever to adjust your supply. And so it's very hard. If you're overstocked, you have to start moving with discounts or whatever you're going to do and spending more on PPC. And, if you're running too quick, then maybe you dial down on PPC, you put prices up and all those levers. But it's very hard to knee-jerk, especially if your supply chain's from Asia, because there's just that window between, throttle or pressing the button of the order and that inventory being on the shelf, metaphorically speaking, in Amazon.
Yeah, because I would think if you're trying to sell through inventory faster, you would automatically increase your ad spend. But then I heard people are decreasing their ad spend. And I'm just wondering if people are going to be shifting weight from their left foot to the right foot back and forth all year long, hoping for the best, but not even really having a good sense of what kind of results.
Yeah, obviously when you have a slowdown, you accelerate through advertising and discounting. It's horrible because you're turning cash just to get stuff through. It's a horrible place. It's slightly less painful if you dial down on PPC, increase your price, and then you have really high margin sales. But of course, if you run out of inventory, it's the worst thing of all. So it's a darned if you do, darned if you don't scenario. That's why it's pretty tough. And that's why I think inventory management is one of the biggest arts, and it's not science. There's so many variables that are out of brands' control. It's very hard to get it right.
Right. Isn't this a totally different world than when you were at Thrasio? I know that was a few years ago, but
Thrasio was different because the aggregators at the time, one of their big assets was cash, and so when they were able to order long, or they could pay a bit more to get inventory when there was challenges with supply chain, that was one of their differentiators. But of course, that came back and bit them because when demand dropped, they were suddenly left holding billions of dollars worth of inventory, which was one of the beginnings of the decline of the aggregators. But it's difficult. It's very difficult. The inventory management, I think, is one of the things as a brand.
Well, there's also more sales event holidays with Amazon now. It's not just one Prime Day. It's like Prime Week. And there's stuff there's a spring sale. There's a fall, it's like there's the October stuff, even before you get into the heart of Q4. So I wonder if people are just kind of mentally geared to these benchmarks and not, maybe taking their eye off the ball for other months of the year. I don't know. That's a theory, but
there's one other thing as well, Chris. So I'm talking about costs and supply chain. We have a team now that audits people's FedEx, DHL, UPS contracts.
Okay.
And so that's another cost line that's significant for a lot of brands, that last mile delivery, especially if they're selling on Shopify. So, that's a cost line to look at. We're typically saving brands about 15% on the last mile delivery. And if you're spending 10% of your revenue on shipping, which is common, that equates to another 1.5 to 3% EBITDA or cash flow to then put back into inventory or media spend, PPC, whatever it is, some growth initiative. So, that's last mile is something to look at.
I know you've been at Threecolts for a while now, so I'm curious what else you guys have going on to help people kind of organize their Amazon universe. Because one thing I've noticed, again, with our perspective being ACE and takedowns and how people appeal it and how they react and the time that goes by, you're costing yourself so much when you don't do things right the first time or the second time. So a product might go down for 2 weeks instead of 2 days, and that could be if you're selling $10,000 a day on that ASIN, I mean, you're costing yourself like 6 figures already at that point. So I'm just wondering what the parallel is for what you're doing with people who might cost themselves a lot if they don't make the right decision the first or second attempt.
Yeah, I mean, like the biggest thing that we all hear is margin compression is killing brands, whether you're L'Oreal, Samsung, Colgate, and these are brands we work with, they're feeling the pinch of margin compression just the same as a $500,000 private label seller or reseller is. So the way we're responding to that as a Threecolts as a company is we've bundled 10 tools that used to be $30 to $70 each into a bundle called Seller 365. And now you get 10 tools for one subscription of $69. So we're seeing it as a little bit like the Microsoft Office for e-commerce brands. You may not use all of the tools in there, but if you use one, you get $69 a month worth of value. And there's another 9, you almost certainly will end up using 2 or 3 of them. So that's Seller 365, which is a kind of sub-brand inside Threecolts. That's that, I think. We just launched this 2 weeks ago. It's kind of a rebrand and a relaunch of new set of products.
Okay.
The response we're getting from sellers is phenomenal.
Right. And if people have questions on that, I'll give you a chance to give your email address if that's how you want them to reach you, or another way. But maybe the last question for now would be, do you treat or have different conversations with UK and European sellers versus US sellers, or are you guys kind of everyone's facing similar problems right now and similar solutions are needed?
You've probably seen this. A lot of US sellers come into Europe and then they throw in the towel because they say it's not profitable, it's complex, all the compliance,
regulation,
and it's getting tougher regulation. And so that's what I do see the difference. A lot of US sellers have pulled out of Europe because they're focused on margin, which everyone has to focus on right now, and they have lower margins in Europe and more time lag. So they invest more time per dollar than they do for the same effort in the US. So that's a common theme. And equally, US sellers, European sellers are looking to expand into US. So there's a flow of European sellers going across into US, and I think there's a flow of US sellers pulling out of Europe because of the complexities. But that said, the guys that do commit resource into coming across into Europe tend to do pretty well. It's category products. But if you invest in getting it all right, because it is more complex, you can often be more profitable in the end in Europe than you were in the US. That's what we see.
Yeah. And I bring it up because, I was recently in Seattle on my way back from Asia and met with some people who are really interested in getting more, let's say, international sellers, not just US sellers, to sell in the UK and Europe. And they've been making time to meet with people who go to Seattle to talk about things like that. There seems to be more outreach, more interest. I think in the past, they made some initial forays into, hey, sell in Europe. And it was kind of a highly touted program that maybe fizzled out a little bit early. But I think there's more hands-on, handshakes and in-person meetings, and they want people to go to Amazon Accelerate, for example. I don't know if they'll be at the Prosper show, which is coming up, but it's going to be interesting to see what Amazon does to get more international sellers into Europe because, of course, like you said, there's a lot of regulations, a lot of compliance. And I guess, is that just kind of on purpose by the governments to keep competition away, that their homegrown businesses can maintain what they've built year in, year out without foreign competition? Is that kind of the main thrust of it?
I don't know. A cynical view might.
But it's an open-ended question. I'm also asking myself because I'm trying to figure this I'm trying to figure this stuff out because you also said about Europeans selling in the US. Most European sellers I talk to say too costly, too competitive, and they're reluctant to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I
You know?
think if you sort of distilled it down, European sellers see the US as very competitive and therefore hard to make margin. And then US sellers see Europe as too compliant and complex and therefore expensive. And they make mistakes and then they get, excuse my English, but they get their asses kicked and then they go running back and say, that was a disaster and I'm not doing it again. So, I mean, Amazon are investing massively in global expansion. They've got a team there. The team have their hands tied a little bit because they can't give you a strategy for global expansion or marketplace expansion. So all they can do is introduce you to people in their network, which is not a tied up, joint up strategy. So there are some people, I mean, a good friend of mine used to work for me actually now as acting as a consultant for marketplace expansion. And he's got the global expansion team is sending him clients. Why?
Okay.
Because he gives them a strategy. And then he introduces them to the right people for what they need, doesn't charge, and he gets a kickback from the people should they choose to engage with those service providers in Europe. And it's working really well for brand, for him, and obviously for the service providers in Europe. Because I think where the Amazon global expansion teams struggle is they can't advise, they can't give a strategy. They can just go, here's our service provider network, speak to these guys. And that's not what you need. You need someone to audit your brand, audit your category, look at your cash flow, look at what your priorities are, and then go, right, based on your budget, your category, here's what you need to do, and here's a plan. And there is someone that does that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, I'm sure we'll have this and other similar conversations again soon. Where's the best place for people to reach you if they have questions on this?
LinkedIn, Jim Mann, JIMMANN, or on email, jmann@threecolts.com, or threecolts.com, where you can see Seller 365 and the other tools we were talking about earlier on.
All right, awesome. Jim Mann, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks everyone for listening in. If you have any questions, let us know. We'll see you next time. Take care.